Elderly millionaire was kicked out of a luxury dealership because of his clothes minutes later. The gleaming showroom of Miller's luxury cars buzzed with the quiet hum of wealth and prestige. Sleek Ferraris, their paint jobs reflecting the overhead lights like liquid fire, stood in silent testament to speed and power. It was into this rarefied atmosphere that Edward Miller shuffled, his worn shoes squeaking slightly on the polished floor. At 78, Edward's weathered face and shabby clothes seemed out of place amidst the opulence. His eyes, though, sparkled with determination as he approached a cherry-red Ferrari, running a gnarled hand over its smooth contours. "May I help you?" The voice, dripping with disdain, belonged to Andrew, the dealership's manager. His lips curled into a sneer as he took in Edward's appearance. "Yes, I'd like to purchase this Ferrari," Edward replied, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. Andrew's laugh was sharp and cruel. "I think you're in the wrong place, old man. Perhaps try the used car lot down the street?" Edward opened his mouth to respond, but Andrew cut him off. "Security, please escort this gentleman out. We can't have him disturbing our real customers." As two burly guards approached, Edward's eyes flashed with a mix of anger and sadness. Without a word, he allowed himself to be led out, the eyes of other patrons following him with a mix of pity and amusement. Little did they know that in mere hours, the same old man they had dismissed would return, setting in motion a chain of events that would change lives forever. The scene shifts, and we see a young boy, his face alight with joy, seated in the passenger seat of a gleaming Ferrari. The car roars down an empty road, the boy's laughter competing with the engine's growl. Behind the wheel, Edward Miller smiles, tears glistening in his eyes as he watches his grandson experience a dream come true. How did we get from humiliation to triumph? The answer lies in a tale of love, sacrifice, and the power of a child's dream. Edward Miller's life was a study in contrasts. At 78, he possessed a fortune that most could only dream of, yet he lived in a modest suburban house that had seen better days. His wardrobe consisted of well-worn shirts, simple fabric pants, and shoes that had long lost their shine. To those who knew him only superficially, he was just another ordinary elderly man, indistinguishable from countless others who lived quiet lives of retirement. But Edward's eyes told a different story. They sparkled with a keen intelligence and a depth of experience that belied his humble appearance. Years ago, a stroke of luck had changed his life forever, a lottery win that had catapulted him into the ranks of the wealthy. Yet, unlike many who find sudden riches, Edward had chosen a path of simplicity and discretion. His days began early, with a walk around the neighborhood where he greeted old friends and acquaintances with a serene smile. He spent most of his time on simple activities, tending to his garden, reading his favorite books, and visiting his daughter Alice and his grandson Arthur. To Edward, money had never been a source of happiness. He used it sparingly, maintaining a lifestyle that could be considered austere by many. Arthur, at 7 years old, was the light of Edward's life. The boy had a spark in his eyes that seemed to brighten the world around him. From an early age, Arthur had developed a passion for cars, particularly exotic ones. He could name every model of Ferrari, recite their specifications, and spoke of them as if they were living, breathing creatures. But life had dealt Arthur a cruel hand. Diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at an age when most children are just beginning to explore the world, Arthur faced a future filled with uncertainty and physical challenges. The doctor's prognosis was grim, the disease was progressing rapidly, and time was a luxury Arthur didn't have. Alice, Edward's daughter and Arthur's mother, bore the weight of this reality with a strength that amazed and humbled her father. A single mother since Arthur's father had left shortly after the diagnosis, Alice juggled her son's medical appointments, her job as a school teacher, and her own grief with a grace that seemed almost superhuman. Yet, in the quiet moments when she thought no one was looking, the toll of her struggles was evident in the slump of her shoulders and the worry lines etched around her eyes. Miles away from the Miller family's modest home, in the gleaming showroom of Miller's luxury cars, Another drama was unfolding. Ryan, a young salesman with an earnest smile and kind eyes, was in the midst of a personal crisis. At 25, he had fallen into the job at the dealership almost by accident, seeing it as a temporary stopgap while he figured out his true calling. But 3 years had passed, and he found himself still there, torn between the comfortable salary and the nagging feeling that he was meant for something more. Ryan's mother, Abigail, was the owner of the dealership. A shrewd businesswoman with a heart of gold, Abigail had built the company from the ground up. She had a keen eye for people, able to see beyond the surface to the person underneath. It was this quality that had led her to hire Andrew as the dealership's manager, despite his sometimes abrasive personality. She believed in second chances and saw potential in the ambitious young man. Andrew, however, was a study in contradiction. Outwardly charming when it suited him, he harbored a deep-seated insecurity that manifested as cruelty towards those he deemed beneath him. His polished exterior and impeccable suit hid a calculating mind, always looking for the next opportunity to advance. Unbeknownst to Abigail, Andrew had been slowly manipulating accounts and cultivating relationships with key clients, all in preparation for a takeover bid that would see him as the new owner of Miller's luxury cars. As these lives orbited around each other, seemingly disconnected, fate was preparing to bring them crashing together in a way none of them could have anticipated. The catalyst for this convergence was a simple wish born in the heart of a child facing an uncertain future. It had been during one of Arthur's many hospital stays that the seed of an idea had been planted. Edward, sitting by his grandson's bedside, had been regaling him with stories of his youth, of adventures had and dreams pursued. Arthur, his small frame dwarfed by the hospital bed, had listened with rapt attention, his eyes shining with excitement, despite the fatigue evident in every line of his body. "Grandpa," Arthur had said, his voice barely above a whisper, "if you could have any wish in the world, what would it be?" Edward had paused, considering the question with the seriousness it deserved. "To see you happy and healthy, my boy. That's all I could ever wish for." Arthur had smiled at that, a smile that seemed to light up the sterile hospital room. "You know what my wish would be, Grandpa? To ride in a Ferrari. A real one, just like in the movies. To feel the wind in my hair and hear the engine roar." In that moment, looking at his grandson's face, alight with joy at the mere thought of his dream, Edward made a decision that would set in motion a chain of events none of them could have foreseen. He would make Arthur's wish come true, no matter the cost. Little did Edward know that his decision would not only fulfill a dying child's dream, but would also become a catalyst for change, redemption, and unexpected connections. As he left the hospital that day, his mind already formulating plans, the universe began to align in ways both mysterious and profound. The stage was set, the players in position. A simple wish was about to transform lives, challenge perceptions, and reveal the extraordinary power of love, compassion, and the human spirit. The decision to buy a Ferrari for Arthur didn't come easily to Edward. As he sat in his modest living room, the weight of his grandson's wish heavy on his heart, he found himself grappling with a myriad of emotions. The practical side of him, the one that had carefully managed his lottery winnings for years, balked at the idea of spending such an exorbitant amount on a car. But the grandfather in him, the one who saw the light slowly fading from Arthur's eyes with each passing day, knew that this was about more than money. With trembling hands, Edward reached for the phone. He dialed Alice's number, his heart pounding with anticipation and a touch of fear. As the phone rang, he rehearsed his words, trying to find the best way to broach the subject. "Dad." Alice's voice came through, tired but warm. "Is everything okay?" Edward took a deep breath. "Alice, dear, I've been thinking about Arthur's wish, the Ferrari ride." There was a pause on the other end of the line. When Alice spoke again, her voice was cautious. "What about it, Dad?" "Dad, I want to buy him one. A Ferrari. To make his wish come true." The silence that followed was deafening. Edward could almost hear the gears turning in Alice's mind. processing this unexpected declaration. "Dad," Alice finally said, her voice a mix of disbelief and concern, "do you have any idea how much a Ferrari costs? And we can't afford that. We need to focus on Arthur's treatments, on giving him the best care possible." Edward had anticipated this reaction. "Alice, listen to me. I have the means to do this. You remember the lottery win? I've been saving, investing. We can do this for Arthur without compromising his care." "But Dad, it's frivolous." Alice's voice rose, a note of frustration creeping in. "A Ferrari? When Arthur needs medications, therapies, and God knows what else? How can we justify spending money on a car when my son is fighting for his life?" Edward closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his daughter's words. He understood her perspective, her fear, her desire to cling to practical solutions in the face of an impossible situation. But he also knew something that Alice, in her worry and grief, had perhaps forgotten. "Alice," he said softly, "do you remember what Dr. Thompson said last week about Arthur's prognosis?" A choked sob came through the phone. "Dad, please, I can't." "I know it's hard, sweetheart, but we both know that Arthur's time, it's limited. We're doing everything we can medically, but what about his spirit, his joy? This isn't just about a car, Alice. It's about giving Arthur a moment of pure happiness, a dream come true." The line went quiet again, but Edward could hear Alice's muffled sobs. His heart ached for his daughter, for the impossible choices she faced every day. "I just want him to be okay, Dad," Alice whispered. "I want him to have a future." "I know, sweetheart. We all do. But since we can't guarantee that, shouldn't we make sure that the time he has is filled with as much joy as possible?" There was a long pause, broken only by Alice's quiet sniffles. Finally she spoke, her voice small but resolute. "Okay, Dad, if you really can do this without compromising Arthur's care, then let's do it. Let's give him his Ferrari ride." Relief washed over Edward. "Thank you, Alice. I promise you this will be worth it, to see Arthur smile like that." "I know, Dad, I know." Alice's voice was stronger now, a hint of hope creeping in. "Just be careful, okay? This is a lot of money we're talking about." After exchanging a few more words and saying their goodbyes, Edward hung up the phone. He sat back in his chair, emotionally drained but filled with a sense of purpose. Tomorrow he would visit the Ferrari dealership. Tomorrow he would take the first step towards making Arthur's dream a reality. As he closed his eyes, Edward could almost hear the roar of a Ferrari engine, could almost see Arthur's face lit up with joy. It would be worth it, he told himself. Every penny, every moment of stress and worry would be worth it to give his grandson this one perfect moment of happiness. Little did Edward know that his decision would set in motion a series of events that would change not just Arthur's life, but the lives of everyone involved in ways they could never have imagined. The stage was set, the players were in position, and the curtain was about to rise on a story of love, sacrifice, and the extraordinary power of a child's dream. As our story unfolds, dear viewers, we invite you to join us on this incredible journey. If you've been moved by Edward's love for Arthur, touched by the power of a child's wish, or intrigued by the twists and turns yet to come, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing these heartwarming tales to life, reminding us all of the extraordinary impact one act of kindness can have. Don't miss the next chapter in this remarkable story. Hit that subscribe button now. The morning sun had barely peeked over the horizon when Edward Miller stepped out of his modest home. He had spent a restless night, his mind racing with thoughts of the task ahead. As he walked towards his old, reliable sedan, he caught his reflection in the car's window. The man staring back at him looked ordinary, unremarkable even, in his well-worn clothes and scuffed shoes. Edward allowed himself a small, wry smile. Today, appearances would be deceiving indeed. The drive to Miller's luxury cars was uneventful, but with each mile that passed, Edward felt his resolve strengthening. He thought of Arthur, of the joy that would light up his grandson's face when he saw the Ferrari. It was this image that propelled him forward, that gave him the courage to step into a world so far removed from his own. As Edward pulled into the dealership's parking lot, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of intimidation. The building before him was a monument to luxury and excess, all gleaming glass and polished chrome. For a moment he second-guessed himself. Was he really prepared for this? But then Arthur's face flashed in his mind once more, and he knew he had to try. With a deep breath, Edward stepped out of his car and made his way to the entrance. As he pushed open the heavy glass doors, he was immediately enveloped in an atmosphere of opulence. The showroom floor stretched out before him, a sea of automotive perfection. Ferris of every color imaginable stood proudly on display. Their sleek lines and powerful engines a testament to Italian engineering at its finest. Edward's eyes were drawn to a particular model, a cherry-red Ferrari 488 GTB. It was breathtaking, its curves and angles perfectly balanced, promising speed and excitement with every inch of its design. This, Edward thought, this is the one that will make Arthur's dream come true. As he approached the car, running his hand reverently along its flawless paintwork, Edward became aware of a presence behind him. He turned to find himself face to face with Andrew, the dealership's manager. Andrew's eyes swept over Edward's appearance, and his lip curled in barely disguised disdain. "Can I help you?" Andrew's tone was cold, bordering on hostile. Edward straightened his back, meeting Andrew's gaze steadily. "Yes, I'm interested in purchasing this Ferrari." Andrew's eyebrows shot up, and he let out a sharp, derisive laugh. "You purchase a Ferrari? I think you might be in the wrong place, old man. The used car lot is down the street." Edward felt a flare of anger at Andrew's dismissive attitude, but he tamped it down. And he had come here with a purpose, and he wouldn't let this man's rudeness deter him. "I assure you I'm in the right place. I have the means to purchase this car, and I intend to do so today." Andrew's face hardened. "Listen, I don't have time for jokes. We deal with serious buyers here, people of means and taste." "Not," he gestured vaguely at Edward's attire, "whatever this is supposed to be. No, I'm going to have to ask you to leave before you disturb our real customers." Edward opened his mouth to protest, but before he could get a word out, Andrew had signaled to the security guards. Two burly men approached, their faces impassive. "Please escort this gentleman out," Andrew said, his voice dripping with sarcasm on the word gentleman, "and make sure he doesn't come back." As the guards took Edward by the arms, he felt a mix of humiliation and anger washing over him. He had known this wouldn't be easy, but he hadn't expected such blatant disrespect. As he was led towards the exit, Edward caught sight of a young man watching the scene unfold, a look of discomfort on his face. That young man was Ryan, and as he watched Edward being escorted out, he felt a knot forming in his stomach. This wasn't right. It went against everything he believed in, everything his mother had taught him about treating people with respect regardless of their appearance. As the doors closed behind Edward, Ryan made a decision. He couldn't let this stand. Quickly, he made his way to the back office where he knew his mother, Abigail, would be working. "Mom," Ryan said as he burst into the office, slightly out of breath. "Something just happened that you need to know about." Abigail looked up from her paperwork, concern etching her features at her son's agitated state. "What is it, Ryan? What's wrong?" Ryan recounted what he had witnessed, his words tumbling out in a rush. As he spoke, he saw his mother's expression change from concern to disappointment and then to anger. "He did what?" Abigail's voice was quiet, but Ryan could hear the steel beneath it. "Andrew threw a potential customer out based on his appearance." Ryan nodded, relieved that his mother understood the gravity of the situation. "It was awful, Mom. The man was treated like he was nothing, just because he didn't look like our usual clientele." "Well, that's okay." Abigail stood up, her face set in determination. "This is not how we do business. Not now, not ever." She turned to Ryan. "Can you find that gentleman? Bring him back if you can. I want to apologize personally and hear what he has to say." Ryan nodded, grateful for his mother's response. As he turned to leave, Abigail called out, "And Ryan, thank you for telling me. You did the right thing." With a small smile, Ryan hurried out of the office and towards the parking lot. He scanned the area, hoping to catch sight of Edward. To his relief, he saw the elderly man slowly making his way towards an old sedan parked at the far end of the lot. "Sir," Ryan called out, jogging towards Edward. "Sir, please wait." Edward turned, surprise evident on his face as he saw Ryan approaching. "Yes." Ryan came to a stop, slightly out of breath. "Sir, I'm so sorry for what happened in there. It was completely unacceptable. I've spoken to the owner, my mother, and she would like to personally apologize and hear what you have to say. Would you please come back inside?" Edward hesitated, the sting of his earlier humiliation still fresh. But there was something in Ryan's earnest expression, a genuine regret and desire to make things right, that made him reconsider. "All right," Edward said after a moment. "I'll come back." As they walked back towards the dealership, Ryan introduced himself properly and tried to make small talk, hoping to put Edward at ease. For his part, Edward found himself warming to the young man. It was clear that Ryan was cut from a different cloth than the arrogant manager who had dismissed him so cruelly. When they re-entered the showroom, Andrew was nowhere to be seen. Instead, a woman who Edward assumed must be Abigail was waiting for them, her face a mask of professional concern. "Mr. Abigail began, extending her hand. "Miller. Edward Miller," Edward replied, shaking her hand firmly. "Mr. Miller, I'm Abigail Thompson, the owner of this dealership. I want to extend my sincerest apologies for the treatment you received earlier. It goes against everything we stand for here at Miller's Luxury Cars." Edward nodded, accepting the apology. "Thank you, Ms. Thompson. I appreciate your willingness to make this right." Abigail gestured towards her office. "Please come in. I'd like to hear more about what brought you here today." As they settled into Abigail's office, Edward took a deep breath. He had come here with a purpose, and now was the time to see it through. "Ms. Thompson," he began, his voice steady despite the emotion he felt welling up inside him, "I came here today to purchase a Ferrari. Not for myself, but for my grandson Arthur." Edward went on to explain about Arthur's condition, his love for Ferraris, and his wish to experience a ride in one before his illness progressed too far. As he spoke, he saw the expressions on Abigail and Ryan's faces change from polite interest to deep empathy. "Mr. Miller," Abigail said softly when Edward had finished, "I'm deeply moved by your story and your dedication to your grandson. We would be honored to help make Arthur's dream come true." Edward nodded, grateful for their understanding, but there was one more thing he needed to address. "I appreciate that, Miss Thompson. But there's something else you should know." He paused, gathering his thoughts. "I'm not just some old man who wandered in here on a whim. Years ago, I won a significant amount in the lottery. I've lived simply and invested wisely, and I have the means to purchase this Ferrari outright." The revelation hung in the air for a moment, Ryan and Abigail processing this unexpected information. Then Abigail smiled, a genuine warmth in her expression. "Mr. Miller, your financial situation doesn't change how we feel about helping you and Arthur. But I must admit I'm curious. Why live so simply when you have such means?" Edward chuckled softly. "Money doesn't define who we are, Ms. Thompson. I learned that long ago. What matters is how we treat others, the love we share, the dreams we help come true. That's why I'm here today." As Edward spoke, none of them noticed Andrew hovering just outside the office door, his face a mask of shock and growing panic. He had returned from dealing with a minor issue to find the old man he had humiliated now in deep conversation with the owner, and from the snippets he could hear, it seemed his carefully laid plans were about to unravel. Andrew had been meticulously plotting to take over the dealership for months. He had manipulated accounts, cultivated relationships with key clients, all in preparation for a hostile takeover. But now, with this wealthy customer that he had so callously dismissed, his schemes were in jeopardy. If Abigail realized how badly he had misjudged the situation, if she discovered even a hint of his underhanded dealings, everything he had worked for would be lost. Inside the office, oblivious to Andrew's turmoil, the conversation continued. Abigail and Ryan were now fully invested in helping Edward make Arthur's dream a reality. They discussed models, features, and even began to plan how they could make the delivery of the car a special event for Arthur. As the discussion wound down, Edward felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He had come here uncertain and apprehensive, and now he was leaving with not just a path to fulfilling Arthur's wish, but with new allies who understood the importance of what he was trying to do. "Mr. Miller," Abigail said as they stood to conclude their meeting, "we'll start the paperwork right away, and please bring Arthur to the dealership when he's feeling up to it. We'd love to meet him and show him around." Edward nodded, emotion thick in his voice. "Thank you. You have no idea what this means to me, to Arthur." As they exited the office, they found Andrew waiting, his usual smug expression replaced by one of barely concealed anxiety. Abigail's face hardened as she saw him, remembering his earlier behavior. "Andrew, my office." "Now," she said, her tone brooking no argument. As Andrew slunk into the office, Abigail turned back to Edward. "Again, Mr. Miller, I apologize for any distress you were caused. Rest assured it will be dealt with." Edward watched as Abigail closed the door behind her, leaving Andrew to face the consequences of his actions. He felt no joy in the man's discomfort, only a quiet satisfaction that justice would be served. As Ryan led him back to the showroom floor to begin the process of selecting the perfect Ferrari for Arthur, Edward allowed himself to fully embrace the excitement of the moment. Soon, very soon, he would see the look of pure joy on Arthur's face as his dream came true. Little did Edward know that this was just the beginning. The purchase of the Ferrari would set in motion a chain of events that would change not just Arthur's life, but the lives of everyone involved in ways they could never have imagined. The stage was set, the players were in motion, and the real drama was about to unfold. As Edward stood in the showroom, his eyes roaming over the sleek lines of the Ferrari that would soon be Arthur's dream come true, his mind drifted back to a time when cars represented not joy, but unspeakable loss. It had been a crisp autumn evening nearly 3 decades ago. Edward's son, Michael, Arthur's father, had just turned 18. He was a bright, ambitious young man with a passion for cars that rivaled his own son's. That evening, Michael had been eager to show off his driving skills in the new sports car he had saved up for months to buy. "Dad, you've got to see how she handles," Michael had said, his eyes shining with excitement. "Just a quick drive around the block, I promise." Edward had hesitated. It was getting dark, and something in his gut told him to say no, but the enthusiasm in his son's voice had won him over. "All right, but just around the block," he had conceded. Those words would haunt Edward for years to come. They had barely made it halfway around the block when it happened. A drunk driver, swerving wildly, had come out of nowhere. Michael, still inexperienced behind the wheel, had panicked. The screech of tires, the crunch of metal, and then silence. Edward closed his eyes, willing away the memory of the twisted wreckage, of Michael's broken body being pulled from the car. His son had died instantly, they said. Small comfort for a father who had to bury his child. In the years that followed, Edward had avoided high-performance cars, each sleek vehicle a painful reminder of what he had lost. When he had won the lottery a few years later, many had expected him to indulge in luxury cars and other extravagances. At Weststead, Boyce, instead, he had chosen a life of simplicity, investing his winnings wisely but living modestly. And now, here he was, surrounded by the very machines he had shunned for so long, all for Arthur, the grandson who had never known his father, but who had inherited his passion for cars. "Mr. Miller?" Ryan's voice broke through Edward's reverie. "Are you all right?" Edward blinked, bringing himself back to the present. Yes, just remembering something." Ryan nodded, sensing the weight of unspoken memories. "Take your time, sir. Choosing the right car is an important decision." As Ryan stepped away to give Edward some space, he found himself lost in his own thoughts. At 25, he was at a crossroads in his life, torn between the comfort of his current job and the nagging feeling that he was meant for something more. Ryan had never planned on working at a luxury car dealership. Growing up, he had dreamed of becoming a teacher, inspired by the educators who had made such a difference in his own life. But life has a way of taking unexpected turns. When his father had passed away suddenly 5 years ago, leaving Abigail to run the dealership alone, Ryan had put his dreams on hold to help his mother. This what was meant to be a temporary arrangement had stretched into years, and now Ryan found himself wondering if he had lost sight of his true calling. He loved his mother dearly and was grateful for the opportunities the dealership had provided. The work wasn't bad, he enjoyed interacting with customers and took pride in matching them with their perfect car. But at night, when the showroom was quiet and the gleaming cars stood like silent sentinels, Ryan would find himself thinking of classrooms filled with eager young minds, of the difference he could make as a teacher. Watching Edward now, seeing the profound impact this purchase would have on his grandson's life, Ryan felt a familiar stirring in his heart. This, he realized, was why he had been drawn to teaching in the first place, the desire to make a meaningful difference in people's lives. But how could he leave now? The dealership was his mother's legacy, and she relied on him. And after the incident with Andrew, Ryan felt more responsible than ever for ensuring that the business operated with integrity and compassion. As these thoughts swirled in his mind, Ryan noticed Andrew emerging from Abigail's office, his face ashen. The manager's eyes darted around nervously before landing on Edward. For a moment it seemed as though Andrew might approach, perhaps to offer an apology. But then he turned abruptly and disappeared into the back of the showroom. Ryan frowned, making a mental note to keep a closer eye on Andrew in the coming days. Something about the manager's behavior didn't sit right with him. Pushing these concerns aside for the moment, Ryan returned his attention to Edward, who seemed to have composed himself and was now examining the Ferrari with renewed interest. "Have you made a decision, Mr. Miller?" Ryan asked, approaching with a warm smile. Edward nodded, his hand resting on the hood of the cherry red Ferrari 488 GTB. This one. This is the one that will make Arthur's dream come true. As Ryan began explaining the features of the car and the purchasing process, Edward found his earlier melancholy giving way to excitement. Yes, the memory of Michael's loss would always be with him, but perhaps it was time to create new memories, joyful ones, associated with these magnificent machines. While Ryan and Edward discussed the details of the sale, Abigail was in her office, still reeling from her conversation with Andrew. The manager's behavior towards Edward had been bad enough, but as she had pressed him for explanations, inconsistencies in his accounts of recent dealings had come to light. Abigail prided herself on running an ethical business, one that treated all customers with respect regardless of their appearance or perceived wealth. Andrew's actions flew in the face of everything she believed in, and now she found herself questioning every decision he had made in recent months. With a heavy sigh, Abigail pulled up the dealership's financial records on her computer. She had a sinking feeling that Andrew's misdeeds went beyond poor customer service, and she was determined to get to the bottom of it. As she delved into the numbers, a pattern began to emerge. Subtle discrepancies, easily overlooked individually but forming a troubling picture when viewed together. It seemed that Andrew had been manipulating the books, siphoning off small amounts, and covering his tracks with creative accounting. Abigail felt a mix of anger and disappointment wash over her. She had trusted Andrew, had seen potential in him despite his sometimes abrasive personality. Now it appeared that trust had been misplaced. A soft knock at the door interrupted her grim discoveries. "Come in," she called, quickly minimizing the spreadsheets on her screen. Ryan entered, his face alight with excitement. "Mom, Mr. Miller has made his choice. We're ready to start the paperwork." Abigail forced a smile, pushing aside her concerns about Andrew for the moment. This was a happy occasion. After all, a loving grandfather fulfilling his grandson's dream. She wouldn't let Andrew's betrayal taint that. "That's wonderful, Ryan. I'll be right out to finalize everything." As Ryan turned to leave, Abigail called out, "And Ryan, you did good today. I'm proud of you." Ryan's smile widened at his mother's praise. As he headed back to the showroom, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Maybe, he thought, there was a way to combine his passion for teaching with his work at the dealership. Perhaps he could develop educational programs about automotive history and technology for schools, or start a mentorship program for underprivileged youth interested in the industry. The idea energized him, and he made a mental note to discuss it with his mother later. For now, though, he had a very special sale to complete. Back in the showroom, Edward was on the phone with Alice, sharing the exciting news. "It's done, sweetheart. We found the perfect Ferrari for Arthur." There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line, then Alice's voice came through, thick with emotion. "Oh, Dad, I still can't believe we're doing this. Are you sure?" "I'm sure," Edward said firmly. "You should see this car, Alice. It's everything Arthur has ever dreamed of. When can we bring him to the dealership?" As Edward and Alice worked out the logistics of bringing Arthur to see his surprise, Ryan busied himself with preparing the necessary paperwork. He couldn't help but feel a sense of anticipation, imagining the joy on Arthur's face when he saw the Ferrari. Abigail joined them a few minutes later, her professional demeanor firmly in place, despite the turmoil she felt inside regarding Andrew's deceptions. She warmly congratulated Edward on his purchase and assured him that they would make the delivery of the car a truly special event for Arthur. As the final details were being ironed out, Andrew reappeared in the showroom. His earlier bravado was gone, replaced by a nervous energy that set Ryan on edge. The manager hovered on the periphery, his eyes darting between Edward, Abigail, and the Ferrari. Finally, unable to contain himself any longer, Andrew approached the group. "Mr. Miller," he began, his voice uncharacteristically humble, "I owe you an apology. My behavior earlier was inexcusable. I hope you can forgive me." Edward regarded Andrew for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, to everyone's surprise, he extended his hand. "Apology accepted, young man. Let this be a lesson in not judging a book by its cover. Like a son." Andrew shook Edward's hand, relief evident on his face. But as he met Abigail's stern gaze, he knew that he wasn't out of the woods yet. There would be consequences for his actions, both seen and unseen. Those seen and unseen. As the group dispersed, each lost in their own thoughts about the events of the day, none of them could have predicted the ways in which their lives would continue to intersect in the coming weeks. The purchase of the Ferrari was just the beginning of a journey that would challenge their perceptions, test their values, and ultimately reveal the extraordinary power of compassion and second chances. Edward left the dealership that day with a lightness in his step that he hadn't felt in years. As he drove home in his modest sedan, he allowed himself to fully embrace the excitement of what was to come. Soon, very soon, he would see the look of pure joy on Arthur's face as his dream came true. But even as he reveled in the anticipation of Arthur's happiness, a small part of Edward couldn't help but think of Michael. What would his son think of all this? Would he approve of Edward buying such a car for Arthur, given the tragedy that had taken his own life? As if in answer to his unspoken question, a beam of sunlight broke through the clouds, illuminating the road ahead. Edward smiled, choosing to take it as a sign. Michael would understand, he decided, but he would want his son to experience the joy and excitement of these amazing machines, even if he couldn't be there to share it. Meanwhile, back at the dealership, Ryan found himself unable to shake the idea that had taken root in his mind. The more he thought about it, the more convinced he became that there was a way to merge his passion for education with his work at the dealership. That evening, after the last customer had left and the showroom lights had been dimmed, Ryan approached his mother in her office. Abigail was still poring over financial records, her brow furrowed in concentration. "Mom," Ryan said softly, not wanting to startle her. "Do you have a minute? There's something I'd like to discuss with you." Abigail looked up, her expression softening as she saw her son. "Of course, Ryan. What's on your mind?" Ryan took a deep breath, then launched into an explanation of his idea. He talked about developing educational programs about automotive history and technology for local schools, about starting a mentorship program for underprivileged youth interested in the industry. As he spoke, his eyes lit up with enthusiasm, and Abigail found herself swept up in his vision. "It's a wonderful idea, Ryan," she said when he had finished, "and it aligns perfectly with the values we want this dealership to represent. Why don't you put together a formal proposal, and we'll see about implementing it?" Ryan beamed, grateful for his mother's support. As he turned to leave, however, he noticed the worry lines creasing Abigail's forehead. "Mom, is everything okay? You seem stressed." Abigail sighed, debating whether to burden her son with her concerns about Andrew. Finally, deciding that Ryan deserved to know, she explained what she had discovered about the manager's financial manipulations. Ryan listened in shocked silence, his earlier elation giving way to a mix of anger and disappointment. "What are you going to do?" he asked when Abigail had finished. "I'm not sure yet," Abigail admitted. "I need to gather more evidence before I confront him. But one thing's for certain, changes are coming to this dealership." As Ryan left his mother's office that night, his mind was a whirl with conflicting emotions. Excitement about his new project warred with concern over Andrew's betrayal. But underlying it all was a growing certainty that he had found his place. Perhaps he didn't need to choose between the dealership and his dream of teaching after all. Perhaps this was where he was meant to be, making a difference in his own unique way. As the day drew to a close, each of the key players in our unfolding drama found themselves at a crossroads. Edward, driving home with a heart full of hope and a twinge of bittersweet memories. Ryan, on the cusp of realizing a dream he hadn't known he had. Abigail, facing difficult decisions that would shape the future of her business. And Andrew, unaware that his carefully constructed facade was about to come crashing down. Little did they know that the event set in motion by a simple act of kindness, a grandfather's desire to fulfill his grandson's dream, would continue to ripple outward, touching lives and changing destinies in ways they could never have imagined. The Ferrari, gleaming under the showroom lights, stood as a silent witness to the beginning of this extraordinary journey, a journey of love, redemption, and the enduring power of dreams. As the sun rose on a new day, the Ferrari dealership buzzed with an energy unlike any other. Today was the day Edward would finalize the purchase of Arthur's dream car, and the entire staff was determined to make it a memorable experience. Edward arrived early, his weathered face a mix of excitement and apprehension. As he entered the showroom, he was greeted by Ryan's warm smile and Abigail's professional demeanor. "Good morning, Mr. Miller," Abigail said, extending her hand. "Are you ready to make Arthur's dream a reality?" Edward nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "More than ready. Let's get started." They moved to Abigail's office, where the paperwork was laid out neatly on her desk. As they began to go through the documents, Edward couldn't help but marvel at the surreal nature of the situation. Here he was, a man who had lived frugally for decades, about to spend a small fortune on a car. But as he signed each page, he felt a sense of peace. This wasn't about the money, it was about love, about giving Arthur a moment of pure joy in the face of his challenging circumstances. As they worked through the paperwork, Ryan noticed Andrew hovering near the office door, his face a mask of barely concealed anxiety. The manager's behavior had been erratic since Edward's first visit, and Ryan couldn't shake the feeling that there was more going on than met the eye. Inside the office, Abigail was explaining the various features and customization options available for the Ferrari. Edward listened intently, determined to make every aspect of this car perfect for Arthur. "We can add a special racing stripe in Arthur's favorite color," Abigail suggested, "and perhaps we could have his name embroidered on the headrest." Edward's eyes lit up at the idea. He would love that. Arthur's favorite color is blue. Could we do a metallic blue stripe? As they discussed the details, Edward's phone rang. It was Alice, and from the urgency in her voice, Edward knew something was wrong. "Dad," Alice said, her voice trembling, "Arthur's had a bad night. The doctors are concerned about his latest test results. They're not sure if—" Edward's heart sank. He had known this day was coming, had tried to prepare himself for it, but the reality was still a shock. "I understand, sweetheart. I'll be there as soon as I can." As he hung up, Edward looked at Abigail and Ryan, who had been watching his face grow pale during the call. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Arthur's condition has worsened. I need to get to the hospital." Abigail reached out and squeezed Edward's hand. "Go," she said firmly. Family comes first. We'll handle everything here and be ready whenever Arthur is well enough for his surprise." Edward nodded gratefully and hurried out of the office. As the door closed behind him, Abigail turned to Ryan, her face etched with concern. "We need to speed things up," she said. "That little boy might not have much time left." Ryan nodded, already mentally reorganizing their schedule to prioritize Arthur's Ferrari. "I'll get on it right away. We'll have everything ready as soon as possible." As Edward rushed to the hospital, his mind raced with worry. He had known Arthur's condition was serious, but he had allowed himself to hope that they would have more time. Now, faced with the possibility that Arthur might never get to experience his dream ride, Edward felt a sense of urgency unlike anything he had ever known. At the hospital, he found Alice sitting by Arthur's bedside, her face pale and drawn. Arthur lay still, his small body dwarfed by the medical equipment surrounding him. Edward's heart clenched at the sight. "How is he?" Edward asked softly, placing a hand on Alice's shoulder. Alice looked up, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. "The doctors say his condition is deteriorating faster than they expected. They're doing everything they can," but she trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. Edward nodded, understanding the unspoken fear. He pulled up a chair next to Alice and took Arthur's small hand in his own. "Hey, champ," he said softly. "Grandpa's here, and I've got a surprise for you when you're feeling better." For a moment, Edward thought he saw Arthur's eyelids flutter, but the boy remained still. Edward settled in for a long vigil, his thoughts torn between the grandson before him and the Ferrari waiting at the dealership. Orchard Miller's luxury cars, Ryan had sprung into action. He coordinated with the customization team to expedite the modifications Edward requested. The metallic blue racing stripe was applied with meticulous care, and Arthur's name was expertly embroidered on the headrest. As Ryan oversaw the work, he couldn't help but feel a sense of urgency. Every minute counted, and he was determined to have the car ready at a moment's notice. He thought of Arthur, a boy he had never met, but whose story had touched him deeply and silently willed him to hold on. Abigail, meanwhile, was dealing with her own challenges. The discrepancies she had discovered in the dealership's finances were more extensive than she had initially realized. As she dug deeper, she uncovered a web of deceit that left her reeling. Andrew had not only been skimming money from the business, but had also been manipulating client accounts to cover his tracks. Despite the seriousness of the situation, Abigail found her thoughts continually returning to Edward and Arthur. The love and devotion Edward had shown in his quest to fulfill his grandson's dream had touched her deeply. It reminded her of why she had gone into this business in the first place, not just to sell cars, but to be part of people's dreams and aspirations. As the day wore on, the Ferrari began to take shape. The customizations were completed, and the car was given a final polish that made it gleam under the showroom lights. Ryan stepped back to admire their handiwork, feeling a mix of pride and sadness. The car was perfect, a dream made real. But would Arthur ever get to see it? Just as Ryan was about to call Edward with an update, his phone rang. It was Edward, his voice tight with a mix of worry and hope. "Ryan," Edward said, "Arthur's awake. The doctors say he's stable for now. I think it's time." Ryan's heart leapt. "We're ready, Mr. Miller. The car is perfect. When can we bring it?" So there was a pause on the other end of the line as Edward conferred with someone, presumably a doctor. "Tomorrow morning," he said finally. "The doctors think he'll be strong enough for a short ride tomorrow morning." "We'll be there," Ryan promised. "First thing in the morning." As he hung up, Ryan felt a surge of emotion. This was more than just a car sale. It was the fulfillment of a dying child's wish. He looked at the Ferrari, its metallic blue racing stripe gleaming under the lights, and silently vowed to make this the most special delivery in the dealership's history. That night, as the dealership closed, an air of anticipation hung over the showroom. The Ferrari stood ready, a beacon of hope and a testament to the power of love. Tomorrow it would bring joy to a little boy who had faced more challenges in his short life than most people do in a lifetime. As Ryan turned out the lights, he paused for a moment, his hand resting on the Ferrari's smooth hood. "Hold on, Arthur," he whispered. "Your dream is waiting for you." In the quiet of the showroom, the Ferrari seemed to gleam a little brighter, as if in response to Ryan's words. Tomorrow would bring challenges, emotions, and moments that would change lives forever. But for now, in the stillness of the night, hope reigned supreme. The morning dawned crisp and clear, a perfect day for making dreams come true. At Miller's Luxury Cars, Ryan arrived before sunrise, his heart pounding with anticipation. He found Abigail already there, meticulously inspecting the Ferrari one last time. "Everything looks perfect, Mom," Ryan said, his voice hushed with reverence. Abigail nodded, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "It has to be, Ryan, for Arthur!" As they prepared to leave for the hospital, Andrew appeared, looking haggard and nervous. I'd like to come along," he said hesitantly, "to make amends for my behavior." Abigail and Ryan exchanged a glance. They knew about Andrew's misdeeds now, but this wasn't the time to address them. Today was about Arthur. "All right," Abigail said finally, "but remember this is Arthur's day. Nothing else matters." The drive to the hospital was tense, each lost in their own thoughts. Ryan couldn't help but wonder how Arthur would react. Would the Ferrari bring him the joy they all hoped for? At the hospital, Edward was already waiting outside, his face a mixture of excitement and worry. "He's had a good morning," he said as they approached. "The doctors think he's strong enough for a short ride." As they walked through the hospital corridors, Ryan felt a sense of unreality. The gleaming Ferrari, now parked in the hospital's circular driveway, seemed out of place among the stark white walls and antiseptic smell. They paused outside Arthur's room, gathering themselves. Edward took a deep breath, then pushed the door open. Arthur lay in bed, his small frame dwarfed by the medical equipment surrounding him. But as they entered, his eyes lit up with a spark that defied his frail appearance. "Grandpa," he said, his voice weak but filled with love. Edward moved to his grandson's side, taking his hand gently. "Hey, champ, how are you feeling?" Arthur managed a small smile. "Okay, what's the surprise you promised?" Edward glanced at Ryan, who nodded encouragingly. "Well, Arthur, remember how you always talked about riding in a Ferrari?" Arthur's eyes widened. "Yeah? How would you like to do that today?" But for a moment, Arthur just stared, disbelief written across his face. Then, slowly a smile spread across his features, lighting up the room. "Really? A real Ferrari?" Edward nodded, his own eyes bright with unshed tears. "A real Ferrari just for you, and it's right outside, waiting for us." The next few minutes were a flurry of activity as nurses helped prepare Arthur for the short journey. Despite his excitement, it was clear that even this small effort taxed his strength. But Arthur's determination was palpable, his eyes never leaving the door, as if he could already see the Ferrari waiting for him. Finally, with Arthur securely in a wheelchair, they made their way outside. As they emerged into the sunlight, Arthur's gasp was audible to all. There, gleaming in the morning sun, stood the Ferrari. Its cherry red paint gleamed, the metallic blue racing stripe adding a touch of personal flair. And there, embroidered on the headrest, was Arthur's name. It's beautiful," Arthur whispered, his voice filled with awe. Ryan stepped forward, kneeling beside Arthur's wheelchair. "Would you like to take a closer look?" Arthur nodded eagerly, and Ryan carefully wheeled him towards the car. As they approached, Arthur reached out a trembling hand to touch the smooth metal. "It's real," he said, his voice filled with wonder. "It's really real." Edward watched, his heart swelling with emotion. This moment, this look of pure joy on Arthur's face made everything worth it. "Ready for a ride, champ?" Edward asked. Arthur's emphatic nod brought smiles to everyone's faces. With utmost care, they helped Arthur into the passenger seat, ensuring he was comfortable and secure. Edward slid into the driver's seat, feeling a mix of excitement and trepidation. It had been years since he'd driven a high-performance car, and the memories of that tragic night with Michael threatened to overwhelm him. But one look at Arthur's beaming face pushed those dark thoughts away. "Ready?" Edward asked. "Ready," Arthur replied, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. As Edward started the engine, the Ferrari roared to life, its powerful purr filling the air. Arthur's eyes widened in delight at the sound. Slowly, carefully, Edward eased the car of the hospital driveway. In the rearview mirror, he could see Ryan, Abigail and Andrew watching them go, their faces a mixture of joy and apprehension. As they merged onto the main road, Edward felt Arthur's small hand on his arm. "Faster, Grandpa," Arthur urged, his eyes sparkling with excitement. Edward hesitated for a moment, then nodded. "Hold on tight, champ." With a press of the accelerator, the Ferrari surged forward. The world outside became a blur of color as they sped down the road, the engine's roar a symphony of power and precision. Arthur whooped with delight, his frail body seeming to gain strength from the sheer exhilaration of the moment. "This is amazing," he cried, his voice barely audible over the engine's roar. For Edward, the years seemed to fall away. He was no longer an old man weighted down by grief and worry. In that moment, he was simply a grandfather sharing an incredible experience with his beloved grandson. They drove for what seemed like both an eternity and no time at all, the Ferrari eating up the miles as Arthur's laughter filled the car. But all too soon, Edward noticed Arthur's energy beginning to flag. "Time to head back, champ," he said gently. Arthur nodded, his eyes heavy but his smile still radiant. "Thank you, Grandpa," he whispered. This was the best day ever. As they turned back towards the hospital, Edward felt a lump form in his throat. He knew, with a certainty that broke his heart, that this might be the last truly joyful moment he would share with Arthur. The return journey was quieter, Arthur's excitement giving way to a contented exhaustion. As they pulled back into the hospital driveway, Edward saw that quite a crowd had gathered, nurses, doctors and other patients, all drawn by the spectacle of the Ferrari. Ryan rushed forward to help Arthur out of the car, his face split by a wide grin. "How was it, buddy?" he asked. "It was perfect," Arthur said, his voice weak but filled with happiness. As they began to move Arthur back towards the hospital entrance, a commotion broke out nearby, and Edward turned to see Andrew engaged in a heated argument with a man he didn't recognize. "You can't do this," Andrew was saying, his voice pitched high with panic. "You don't understand." The stranger, a stern-looking man in a suit, replied coldly. "I understand perfectly, Mr. Harrison. You're under arrest for embezzlement and fraud." A hush fell over the gathered crowd as two police officers moved forward to handcuff Andrew. Abigail stood nearby, her face a mask of sadness and disappointment. Edward, torn between concern for this unfolding drama and his focus on Arthur, made a split-second decision. "Ryan," he said quietly, "get Arthur inside. He doesn't need to see this." Ryan nodded, quickly wheeling Arthur into the hospital as the boy's tired eyes began to close. Edward approached Abigail, who seemed to be aging years before his eyes. "What's happening?" he asked gently. Abigail sighed heavily. "Andrew's been stealing from the company for months. I discovered it recently and I had to report it. I never thought it would come to this. Not today of all days." Edward placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "You did the right thing, Abigail. Sometimes the right path is the hardest one." As they watched Andrew being led away, his head bowed in shame, Edward couldn't help but feel a twinge of sympathy. Everyone makes mistakes, he thought. It's how we face them that defines us. Inside the hospital, Arthur was being settled back into his room, his face peaceful in sleep, but still bearing traces of the joy from his Ferrari ride. Alice sat beside him, tears of gratitude streaming down her face. "Doesn't her face." "Thank you," she whispered to Edward as he entered the room. "I haven't seen him this happy and I can't remember how long." Edward simply nodded, too overwhelmed with emotion to speak. He took his place on the other side of Arthur's bed, gently holding his grandson's hand. As the excitement of the day faded, a sense of quiet anticipation filled the room. They all knew that Arthur's condition was terminal, that each moment was precious, but for now they had given him a perfect day, a dream fulfilled. Ryan and Abigail joined them a short while later, their faces somber from the events outside but softening as they saw Arthur's peaceful expression. "He looks so happy," Ryan said softly. Abigail nodded. her eyes filling with tears. "We did a good thing today," she said. "All of us." As they stood there, this unlikely group brought together by chance and compassion, a sense of unity washed over them. They had witnessed the power of a simple act of kindness, how it could bring light to even the darkest of situations. Hours passed, the hospital room quiet, except for the steady beep of monitors and the soft sound of Arthur's breathing. Nurses came and went, checking vitals and adjusting medications, but the core group remained steadfast. As evening approached, Arthur stirred, his eyes fluttering open. He looked around, a smile spreading across his face as he saw everyone gathered around him. "Did I dream it?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "The Ferrari?" Edward leaned in, squeezing his hand gently. "No, champ, it was real, all of it." Arthur's smile widened. "It was the best day ever, Grandpa. Thank you." And there wasn't a dry eye in the room as Arthur's gaze moved from person to person, acknowledging each one. When he got to Ryan, he said, "Thank you for making my dream come true." Ryan, choking back tears, replied, "It was my honor, Arthur. You're the bravest person I've ever met." As the night wore on, it became clear that Arthur was fading. The doctors came in more frequently, their faces grave as they checked his vitals. But Arthur remained calm, his hand firmly grasped in Edward's, a serene smile on his face. In the early hours of the morning, Arthur turned to Edward, his eyes bright despite his weakening body. "Grandpa," he said softly, "I'm not scared anymore. I got to ride in a Ferrari. I'm ready for my next big adventure." Edward, his heart breaking even as it swelled with love, leaned in close. "You go on that adventure, champ, and know that we love you, always." With one last bright smile, Arthur closed his eyes. The room fell silent, broken only by the long, steady tone of the heart monitor. As the sun rose on a new day, the world had changed. Arthur was gone, but the impact of his short life and the dream that had been fulfilled lingered. In that hospital room, amid the grief and the tears, there was also a sense of peace. They had given Arthur his perfect day, had shown him the power of love and the magic of dreams come true. In the days that followed, as arrangements were made and goodbyes were said, the unlikely group that had come together for Arthur found themselves bonded by the experience. Edward and Alice, in their grief, found support in Ryan and Abigail. The Ferrari, now a bittersweet symbol of joy and loss, remained at the dealership, a testament to the power of compassion and the enduring strength of the human spirit. And in a small, private ceremony, as Arthur was laid to rest, Edward made a quiet vow. The love and generosity that had brought a moment of pure joy to his grandson's final days would not end here. Arthur's legacy would live on, touching lives and making dreams come true for other children facing similar battles. As the story of Arthur and his Ferrari spread, it served as a reminder to all who heard it of the profound impact a single act of kindness can have. It was a testament to the power of love, the importance of dreams, and the indomitable spirit of a child who, even in his final moments, found joy in life's adventures. Dear viewers, if this story of Arthur's dream and the incredible journey it sparked has touched your heart, we invite you to leave a comment with the number 1. Your engagement helps us understand which stories resonate with you, allowing us to bring more inspiring tales of hope, kindness, and the triumph of the human spirit. Together, we can celebrate the power of dreams and the enduring impact of compassion. So, if you'd like to hear more stories like Arthur's, simply comment one below. Your voice matters, and we're listening. The days following Arthur's Ferrari ride were a bittersweet symphony of hope and heartbreak. While the joy of that perfect day lingered in everyone's hearts, the harsh reality of Arthur's condition couldn't be ignored. His health, which had seemed to improve dramatically during the ride, began to decline rapidly in the following days. Edward found himself spending every waking moment at the hospital, holding Arthur's hand and reminiscing about their adventure in the Ferrari. Alice, exhausted but determined, rarely left her son's side, her face a mask of love and worry. One particularly difficult evening, as Arthur slept fitfully, Edward stepped out of the room to get some air. In the hallway, he found Ryan, who had been visiting daily since the Ferrari ride. "How is he?" Ryan asked, his voice low and concerned. Edward sighed heavily, the weight of the world seemingly on his shoulders. Not good, son. The doctors, they don't think he has much time left. Ryan nodded solemnly, placing a comforting hand on Edward's shoulder. I'm so sorry, Mr. Miller. Is there anything I can do? Edward shook his head, a sad smile on his face. You've already done so much, Ryan. That day in the Ferrari, it meant everything to Arthur, to all of us. As they stood there in silence, both lost in thought, a commotion from Arthur's room startled them. They rushed back in to find Alice frantically pressing the call button, her eyes wide with fear. He's not breathing right, she cried as nurses rushed into the room. The next few minutes were a blur of activity as medical staff worked to stabilize Arthur. Edward and Alice were ushered out of the room, left to watch helplessly through the glass as their beloved boy fought for his life. Ryan, feeling like an intruder in this intensely personal moment, was about to excuse himself when he felt Edward's hand grasp his arm. The older man's eyes, filled with unshed tears, met Ryan's. No words were needed. Ryan understood that his presence was a comfort, a link to the joy Arthur had experienced so recently. After what seemed like an eternity, the doctor emerged from Arthur's room. His face was grave as he approached Edward and Alice. We've managed to stabilize him for now, the doctor said softly. But I'm afraid Arthur's condition has deteriorated significantly. We're doing everything we can, but you should prepare yourselves. Alice let out a choked sob, collapsing into Edward's arms. Edward, his face a mask of grief, nodded stoically. Thank you, Doctor. Can we see him? As they re-entered the room, Arthur looked smaller and more fragile than ever, dwarfed by the medical equipment surrounding him. His eyes fluttered open as they approached, a weak smile forming on his pale face. Mom, Grandpa, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Alice leaned in, gently stroking his hair. We're here, sweetheart. We're right here. Edward took Arthur's hand, marveling at how small and delicate it felt in his own. Hey, champ, how are you feeling? Arthur's smile widened slightly. Tired, he said, but happy. I dreamed about the Ferrari again. Edward felt his heart constrict at these words. It was a pretty amazing ride, wasn't it? Arthur nodded weakly. The best. Grandpa, can you tell me the story again? About the Ferrari? And so, as the night deepened and Arthur's breathing grew more labored, Edward recounted the tale of their Ferrari adventure. He described the gleaming red paint, the roar of the engine, the wind in their hair as they sped down the open road. As he spoke, he could see Arthur reliving the experience, his eyes bright with remembered joy, despite his weakening body. Alice listened too, tears streaming down her face as she memorized every detail of her son's happiness. Ryan, still present, stood quietly in the corner, bearing witness to this poignant moment. As dawn broke, casting a soft golden light through the hospital room window, Arthur's strength began to fade noticeably. His breathing became more labored, his grip on Edward's hand weakening. Grandpa, Arthur whispered, his voice barely audible, I'm scared. Edward leaned in close, his heart breaking. It's okay to be scared, champ, but remember, you're the bravest person I know. Though you've already had the biggest adventure of all, riding in that Ferrari. And now you're going on an even bigger adventure. Arthur's eyes widened slightly. Bigger than the Ferrari? Edward nodded, forcing a smile through his tears. Much bigger, and someday, a long time from now, we'll all join you on that adventure. But for now, you get to be the pioneer, just like those race car drivers you admire so much. A look of peace settled over Arthur's face. I like that, he murmured. Then, with a final burst of energy, he added, I love you, Mom. I love you, Grandpa. Thank you for the Ferrari. Those were Arthur's last words. As the sun climbed higher in the sky, Arthur's breathing slowed and then, with a final soft sigh, stopped altogether. The room fell silent, the absence of the rhythmic beeping of the heart monitor deafening in its finality. Alice let out a heart-wrenching wail, collapsing onto Arthur's still form. Edward stood frozen, his hands still clasping Arthur's, unable to process that the vibrant, loving boy who had brought so much joy to his life was gone. Ryan, tears streaming down his face, quietly left the room to give the family their privacy. In the hallway, he found Abigail, who had arrived just moments too late. As he broke the news to her, Abigail's face crumpled with grief. Even though she had only known Arthur briefly, the impact of his story and his courage had touched her deeply. The next few days passed in a blur of grief and arrangements. Edward moved through it all as if in a dream, his mind still unable to fully grasp the reality of Arthur's absence. Alice, devastated beyond words, leaned heavily on her father for support. The funeral was a small, intimate affair attended by family, close friends and the staff from Miller's luxury cars who had been part of Arthur's Ferrari adventure. As Edward stood by the small casket, preparing to deliver the eulogy, he felt a moment of panic. How could he possibly sum up the life of his grandson? A boy who had lived so briefly yet touched so many. But as he began to speak, the words flowed from his heart. He talked about Arthur's courage, his infectious laugh, his boundless enthusiasm for life despite the challenges he faced. And he spoke about the Ferrari ride, the perfect day when Arthur's dream had come true. "Arthur taught us all so much," Edward said, his voice thick with emotion. "He showed us the power of dreams, the importance of living each day to the fullest. And most of all, he taught us about love, pure, unconditional love that knows no bounds." As he finished speaking, Edward placed a small model Ferrari on top of the casket, a final gift for a boy who had loved the iconic cars so much. And in the days and weeks that followed, Edward and Alice struggled to adjust to a world without Arthur. The house seemed too quiet, the future too uncertain, but slowly, imperceptibly at first, they began to heal. One afternoon, as Edward sat in Arthur's room, surrounded by his grandson's belongings, he came across a notebook he had never seen before. Opening it, he found page after page of Arthur's writing, thoughts, dreams, and observations about the world around him. As Edward read, tears streaming down his face, he realized that even in death, Arthur was still teaching him, still showing him the beauty and wonder of life through a child's eyes. It was then that Edward knew what he had to do. Arthur's story, his courage and his dreams, couldn't end here. Somehow, some way, he would find a way to keep Arthur's spirit alive, to share the lessons his grandson had taught him with the world. As he clutched the notebook to his chest, Edward made a silent vow. Arthur's legacy would live on. The love, the dreams, the joy of that perfect day in the Ferrari, all of it would become part of something bigger, something that would touch the lives of other children facing similar battles. In that moment of grief and inspiration, the seed of an idea was planted. Edward didn't know exactly how, but he knew that Arthur's story was far from over. It was in many ways just beginning. In the quiet days following Arthur's funeral, as Edward and Alice struggled to find a new normal, an unexpected discovery brought a ray of light into their grief-darkened world. It began when Edward, finally feeling strong enough to sort through Arthur's belongings, came across a worn leather-bound journal tucked away in the boy's bedside drawer. With trembling hands, Edward opened the journal, recognizing Arthur's childish scrawl filling the pages. As he began to read, his eyes widened in amazement. This wasn't just a diary, it was a window into Arthur's soul, filled with insights and observations far beyond his years. "Mom, Alice," Edward called out, his voice trembling with emotion. "You need to see this." Alice rushed into the room, worry etched on her face. But as Edward began to read aloud from Arthur's journal, her expression transformed from concern to wonder. "Today I saw a butterfly land on a flower," Edward read, his voice thick with emotion. "It made me think about how short life can be, but also how beautiful. I wonder if that's what I am, a butterfly, here for just a little while, but hoping to leave some beauty behind." Tears streamed down Alice's face as she listened to her son's words. "I had no idea," she whispered. "He never told me he was writing like this." As they pored over the journal together, they discovered page after page of Arthur's thoughts, dreams, and reflections on life. Despite his illness, or perhaps because of it, Arthur had developed a profound understanding of the world around him and the people in it. And there were entries about his love for Ferraris, of course, but also deep reflections on friendship, courage and the meaning of life. Arthur wrote about his fears, but also about his hopes and the things that brought him joy. And woven through it all was a thread of optimism and love that left Edward and Alice in awe. "And we can't keep this to ourselves," Edward said finally, closing the journal reverently. "Arthur's words, they could help so many people." Alice nodded, wiping away her tears. "You're right. This is Arthur's legacy. We need to share it with the world." Over the next few weeks, Edward and Alice worked tirelessly to prepare Arthur's journal for publication. They reached out to publishers, sharing excerpts from the journal and the story of Arthur's Ferrari ride. The response was overwhelming. Publishers were moved by Arthur's wisdom and his ability to find joy and meaning in the face of terminal illness. They saw in his words a message of hope that could resonate with people of all ages, especially those facing their own battles with illness or adversity. As news of Arthur's journal spread, media attention grew. Local newspapers ran stories about the young boy whose words were touching hearts across the country. Television stations requested interviews with Edward and Alice, eager to share Arthur's story with their viewers. In the midst of this whirlwind of activity, an unexpected visitor arrived at Edward's door one rainy afternoon. It was Andrew, the former manager from Miller's Luxury Cars, looking haggard and remorseful. Edward was taken aback, unsure of how to react. But as he looked into Andrew's eyes, he saw genuine regret and a desperation that tugged at his heart. "Mr. Miller," Andrew began, his voice hoarse, I came to apologize. What I did was unforgivable, both to you and to the company. But hearing about Arthur's journal, about his wisdom and forgiveness, it made me realize I needed to face my mistakes." Edward listened silently as Andrew poured out his story. The embezzlement, the lies, the arrests, it had all stemmed from a desperate attempt to prove himself to be something more than he thought he was. But in the process, he had lost himself. "I've served my time," Andrew said, "but that's not enough. I want to make amends, to do something good. I was wondering, is there any way I could help with Arthur's legacy?" Edward was quiet for a long moment, considering Andrew's words. Then, slowly, he nodded. "Arthur believed in second chances," he said softly. "I think he'd want us to give you one. Come inside, Andrew. Let's talk." As Andrew stepped into the house, neither man could have predicted how this moment would shape the future of Arthur's legacy. Meanwhile, at Miller's Luxury Cars, Ryan was facing his own unexpected turn of events. The publicity surrounding Arthur's story and the Ferrari ride had brought a flood of attention to the dealership. People were coming in not just to buy cars, but to hear about Arthur, to be part of something bigger than themselves. Abigail, seeing an opportunity to honor Arthur's memory and transform the business, approached Ryan with an idea. "We've always been about selling dreams," she said, her eyes shining with purpose. "But what if we could do more? What if we could use our success to help other children like Arthur?" Ryan listened, his excitement growing as Abigail outlined her plan. They would start a foundation in Arthur's name, using a portion of every sale to fund experiences for children with terminal illnesses. Not just Ferrari rides, but all kinds of dream fulfillment, whatever would bring joy and meaning to a child's life. "It's perfect," Ryan said, his mind already racing with possibilities. "And we could use the dealership as a base for fundraising events, awareness campaigns." As they brainstormed, Ryan felt a sense of purpose he had never experienced before. This was why he had stayed at the dealership all these years, not just to sell cars, but to make a difference in people's lives. Back at Edward's house, the conversation with Andrew had taken an unexpected turn. As they talked about Arthur's journal and the impact it was having, Andrew had an idea. "What if we could bring Arthur's words to life?" he suggested. "Not just in a book, but in a way that kids could really connect with. Maybe an animated series." Edward's eyes lit up at the idea. "Arthur would have loved that," he said softly. "He always did have a vivid imagination." And so, a new project was born. Andrew, eager to use his business skills for good, threw himself into researching animation studios and developing a pitch for the series. Edward and Alice worked on adapting Arthur's journal entries into scripts, carefully preserving the authenticity of his voice. As word of the project spread, support poured in from unexpected quarters. A famous voice actor, touched by Arthur's story, offered to voice the animated version of Arthur for free. A renowned animation studio proposed a partnership, seeing the potential for a series that could educate and inspire children around the world. Even as these plans were taking shape, another surprise was in store. One afternoon, as Edward was sorting through some of Arthur's old drawings, he came across a sketch that made his heart skip a beat. And it was a design for a car, clearly inspired by the Ferrari, but with some unique twists that could only have come from Arthur's imagination. Excited, Edward shared the drawing with Ryan and Abigail. To his amazement, they didn't just see a child's drawing, they saw potential. "This could be something special," Abigail said, studying the sketch. "What if we actually built this car, as a tribute to Arthur and as a symbol of our foundation?" The idea took hold, sparking excitement in everyone involved. Engineers at the dealership began working on turning Arthur's design into a reality, while Ryan reached out to Ferrari themselves, sharing Arthur's story and proposing a collaboration. To everyone's amazement, Ferrari responded with enthusiasm. They were moved by Arthur's story and saw an opportunity to be part of something truly meaningful. They offered to partner in the creation of a limited edition Arthur special model based on the boy's design and dedicated to raising funds for children with terminal illnesses. As these various projects gained momentum, Edward found himself at the center of a whirlwind of activity he could never have imagined. Arthur's journal was in the final stages of publication, the animated series was in development, and work on the special edition Ferrari was underway. But more than the projects themselves, it was the impact they were having that amazed Edward. He received letters daily from people whose lives had been touched by Arthur's words, parents of sick children, adults facing their own battles with illness, and even healthy individuals who had been inspired to live life more fully, all wrote to share how Arthur's wisdom had affected them. One evening, as Edward sat in his study, surrounded by these letters, he felt a presence in the room. For just a moment he could have sworn he saw Arthur standing there, a bright smile on his face and a twinkle in his eye. "We did it, Grandpa," the vision seemed to say. "We're still making dreams come true." As quickly as it had appeared, the vision faded, leaving Edward with tears in his eyes but a warmth in his heart. He realized that though Arthur was gone, his spirit lived on, touching lives and spreading joy in ways they could never have imagined. The tragedy of Arthur's loss remained, a pain that would never fully heal, but alongside it now grew something beautiful, a legacy of hope, courage, and the enduring power of a child's dreams. As the seasons changed and time marched on, the impact of Arthur's legacy continued to grow, touching lives in ways that Edward, Alice, and their newfound friends could never have imagined. The transformation of Miller's luxury cars was perhaps the most visible sign of this change. The dealership, once a symbol of material wealth and status, had become a beacon of hope and compassion. The showroom floor, still gleaming with high-end vehicles, now also featured a special area dedicated to Arthur's story. Visitors could see the very Ferrari that had made Arthur's dream come true, along with displays showcasing the boy's journal entries and artwork. Abigail, with Ryan by her side, had fully embraced the new direction of the business. The Arthur Miller Foundation, born from their initial idea, had blossomed into a full-fledged charitable organization. For every car sold, a significant portion of the profits went directly to funding experiences for children with terminal illnesses. But it wasn't just about selling cars anymore. The dealership regularly hosted events, fundraisers, awareness campaigns, and dream fulfillment ceremonies for sick children. The sight of a beaming child sitting in the driver's seat of a luxury car, their eyes wide with wonder, became a common occurrence. Ryan, who had once struggled to find purpose in his work, now thrived in his role as the foundation's director. He coordinated with hospitals, worked with families, and poured his heart into making children's dreams come true. The teaching instinct that had once pulled him towards a different career now found expression in the educational programs he developed, teaching young people about compassion, resilience, and the importance of giving back. One sunny afternoon, as Ryan was overseeing a dream fulfillment event for a young girl named Sophia, he caught sight of his mother watching from the sidelines, tears glistening in her eyes. "Mom," he said, approaching her with concern, "is everything okay?" Abigail smiled, wiping away a tear. "More than okay, Ryan. I was just thinking about how proud your father would be if he could see this. This is what he always wanted for the business. Not just success, but meaning." Ryan hugged his mother tightly, feeling a sense of completion he had never experienced before, that he was exactly where he was meant to be. Meanwhile, Edward's campaign to improve conditions at the local children's hospital had gained significant traction. Using Arthur's story as a rallying cry, he had managed to secure substantial donations and government grants. The hospital wing that had once seemed cold and clinical was transformed into a warm, welcoming space filled with color and light. Arthur's artwork, reproduced with permission from his journal, adorned the walls. Play areas were established, stocked with toys and games to help children forget, even for a moment, the challenges they faced. A state-of-the-art entertainment system was installed, allowing bedridden children to virtually explore museums, attend concerts, or even take thrilling rides in race cars. But perhaps the most significant change was in the attitude of the staff and the atmosphere of the ward. Inspired by Arthur's resilience and joy, the doctors and nurses approached their work with renewed compassion and energy. They organized regular events, art classes, storytelling sessions, even small concerts to keep the children's spirits high. And Alice, who had initially struggled to find her footing in the wake of Arthur's passing, found a new purpose in coordinating these activities. Her experience as a teacher, combined with a profound understanding of what families in the ward were going through, made her an invaluable asset. One day, as she was reading from Arthur's journal to a group of children, a small boy raised his hand. "Miss Alice?" he said. His voice weak but his eyes bright. Was Arthur scared? "Because I'm scared sometimes, and I want to be brave like him." Alice felt her heart constrict, but she managed a warm smile. "Arthur was scared sometimes too," she said gently, "but he told me once that being brave doesn't mean you're never afraid. It means doing what you need to do, even when you are afraid." The boy nodded solemnly, and Alice saw something change in his eyes, a flicker of determination that reminded her so much of Arthur. In that moment she knew that her son's legacy was alive and well, living on in every child who found courage in his words. As for Andrew, his journey of redemption had not been easy, but it had been transformative. Working alongside Edward to bring Arthur's words to life through the animated series had given him a new perspective on what truly mattered in life. The series, Arthur's Grand Adventures, had become a surprise hit. Children around the world were drawn to the wise, funny, and endearingly optimistic animated Arthur. But it wasn't just entertainment. Each episode, based on entries from Arthur's journal, tackled complex themes like courage, friendship, and finding joy in difficult times. Andrew, once driven by greed and ambition, now found himself moved to tears by letters from parents whose children had found comfort and inspiration in the show. He worked tirelessly, not for personal gain, but to ensure that Arthur's message reached as many people as possible. The limited edition Arthur's Special Ferrari, born from Arthur's imaginative sketch, had become a reality. The unveiling ceremony was a bittersweet affair, filled with tears and laughter. The car, with its unique design features inspired by Arthur's drawing, was a stunning tribute to the boy's creativity and spirit. Ferrari, true to their word, had produced a limited run of the model. Each sale generated a significant donation to the Arthur Miller Foundation, ensuring that Arthur's dream of helping other children would continue for years to come. As Edward stood next to the car, his hand resting on its gleaming hood, he felt a profound sense of completion. "We did it, Arthur," he whispered. we're still making dreams come true. The publication of Arthur's journal, titled The World Through Arthur's Eyes, had become a global phenomenon. Translated into dozens of languages, the book touched hearts across cultures and generations. Its simple yet profound messages of hope, love, and resilience in the face of adversity resonated with millions. Edward found himself traveling the world, speaking at conferences and events, sharing Arthur's story and the lessons they had all learned. He visited children's hospitals, schools, and community centers, always carrying with him Arthur's message of finding joy and purpose, even in life's most challenging moments. One evening, after a particularly moving event at a children's hospital in a far-off country, Edward returned to his hotel room, feeling both exhausted and exhilarated. As he sat on the edge of the bed, he pulled out the worn copy of Arthur's journal that he always carried with him. But opening it to a random page, he read, "Grandpa told me today that life is like a road trip. You never know what's around the next bend, but that's what makes it an adventure." I like that idea. Even though I'm sick, I'm on the biggest adventure of all. And the best part is, I get to share it with the people I love. Edward felt tears well up in his eyes, but they were tears of gratitude rather than sadness. Arthur's short life had set in motion a chain of events that had changed countless lives for the better. His grandson's spirit lived on in every child who found hope in his words, in every family touched by the Foundation's work, in every person inspired to live life more fully. As he closed the journal, Edward made a silent vow to continue this work for as long as he was able. Arthur's adventure might have ended, but the journey he had started was far from over. It lived on in the hearts and actions of all those he had touched, a legacy of love, hope, and the enduring power of a child's dream. In the quiet of his room, thousands of miles from home, Edward felt a deep sense of peace wash over him. He knew that wherever Arthur was now, he was smiling down on them all, his heart full of the joy that comes from knowing that even the smallest life can create ripples that change the world. And so, as the story of Arthur and his Ferrari came to a close, a new chapter began, one filled with hope, inspiration, and the promise of dreams yet to be fulfilled. Dear friends, Arthur's journey reminds us that life, no matter how brief, has the power to create ripples of change that reach far beyond our imagination. His story teaches us that true wealth isn't measured in possessions, but in the lives we touch and the dreams we help fulfill. In the face of unimaginable challenges, Arthur chose joy. He saw beauty in the simplest things and wisdom in life's toughest moments. His courage wasn't the absence of fear, but the determination to embrace life fully despite it. Arthur's legacy challenges us to look beyond appearances, to find the extraordinary in the ordinary, and to recognize that every person, regardless of their circumstances, has a unique gift to offer the world. Remember, it's not the length of our lives that matters most, but the depth of our impact. Like Arthur, we all have the power to turn our struggles into strength, our pain into purpose, and our dreams into a force for good. Let Arthur's story be a reminder that even in our darkest moments, there is light to be found, that in our most challenging times, we can still be a source of hope for others, that our actions, no matter how small, can create a legacy that outlives us. As you go forward, ask yourself, how can I make someone's dream come true today? How can I find joy in the journey regardless of the destination? How can I, like Arthur, leave this world a little better than I found it? In the end, life isn't about waiting for the storm to pass. It's about learning to dance in the rain, to find the Ferrari ride in our everyday moments, and to share that joy with others. This is Arthur's gift to us all. Let's honor it by living fully, loving deeply, and dreaming boldly. After all, we're all on this grand adventure together. So let's make it count for Arthur, for each other, and for all the dreams yet to be fulfilled. We're deeply grateful that you've joined us on this emotional journey through Arthur's story. Your presence and engagement mean the world to us. If Arthur's tale has touched your heart, inspired you, or resonated with you in any way, we'd love to hear from you. Your thoughts, feelings, and reflections are incredibly valuable to us. They're not just comments, they're the fuel that drives us to seek out and share more powerful stories like Arthur's. Please take a moment to leave your thoughts in the comments section below. Whether it's a word, a sentence, or a personal story of your own, every comment is a treasure. Your feedback helps us understand what moves you and guides us in creating content that truly matters. Remember, your voice has power. By sharing your reactions, you're not only honoring Arthur's memory, but also inspiring others who might be going through similar experiences. You never know how your words might touch someone else's life. So please let us know what you think. What part of Arthur's story resonated with you the most? How did it make you feel? What lessons will you take away from it? Your comments are the heartbeat of our channel. They motivate us, inspire us, and remind us why we do what we do. Together, we can keep Arthur's spirit alive and continue to spread messages of hope, resilience, and the power of dreams. Thank you for being part of our community. We can't wait to read your thoughts and to bring you more stories that touch the soul and inspire the heart. Your engagement is what makes all of this possible.